the ICC, the space that's been our home yesterday and today for this conference for Q Berlin. We're going to get some ideas on that now. I'm going to ask architects to join me on stage with their ideas, and I'll ask them to join me all at once, and they'll present their ideas to us as well. They have presentations that they have brought. So I'll ask them to join me on stage now. Thomas Willemeit from Graft Architekten, Silke Neumann from ICCC, and Julian Schuber from ICCC. Please join me. Okay, so Thomas Willemeit is going to start with the presentation on the idea for the ICC, excuse me.
Okay, I think I'm going to do it from here, if that's okay.
Please, feel free.
Because then I can see better. Could you switch on the presentation? Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the conference also here. It's great to have the opportunity to present a strategy for this house while being here, of course, which you normally do not have the opportunity. And I would like to speak a little bit about our vision that has been made about 3 years ago. We are architects. Usually we build buildings, but in this case, when there was a call for ideas by the Senate about 3 years ago, we said that in this building we should study and find out how little you have to do to keep this great building and also to bring it back into life as a place to negotiate the future as it was planned to be. And I think it's interesting also to know that I'm going to show you some things that were made already 3 years ago, but the study survived and developed, and some of you know the study. But it has never been published. But it survived because it was the only one in the call for ideas that said you don't have to demolish it and you don't have to change many things in it. And as we're architects, always trying to speculate and visualize, also for you to have a possibility to join the conversation and to speculate with us, I would like to show you some images. The first one is this one. You probably, oh, that's not so smooth, but you can imagine probably we made some images, but also movies that here don't run very well, that showed that place as a space for imaginations. So imagine an ICC come back as a place for the unexpected and for experimentations. You see it re-inhabited by many users, and we believe it needs to be very flexible for a very great variety of users that could happen here. Imagine Berlin creates a showcase for its inventive research community. Much of this was talked about already before. Imagine there's a platform for creativity, startups, the flexibility of the mind. Imagine the sleeping beauty, the ICC, is open every day, accessible and part of the economic and cultural life of Berlin. So what do you need to do that? Of course, we believe that there needs to be a new idea also for the house, for the building. As a starting point, it's very interesting. I thank the organizers also for the scenography of the day. We started around the topic of mobility, not only because it was the driver for economic development and our societies in the last centuries, but also because we believed that physical mobility has something to do with mental mobility. So we have learned also yesterday that urban development very much depends on mobility, because that's why people get to cities, to have access to mobility, and also the intertwining of cities is something that we believe our city will be built on. So the history of mobility has been very important also in Berlin, as it was the place for the first flying attempts, the first traffic light, the first electric tram, the fastest train in the world. It has the Avus as the first exclusive road for cars in the world, and you probably remember that the silver arrows that were drivers of the technological revolution at that time are still alive today on Formula One tracks. So it was the driver. The city was the driver of ideas for mobility and still is with industry leaders, innovators, and countless mobility startups. So if you look at, we have also learned from Christoph Rauhut how well the building is connected. It's basically sitting in a junction of modes of transportation, of freeways and also urban transport. Why not think about expanding that and make it a home for all these startups, all research, all the technology leaders who are busy in that field in the future? So what if the ICC would become a platform for the industry and the science community, as well as a place to experience innovations, so to communicate, not only work on these on this technology, but also to experience, allow people to access it, but also house for communication, for communicating about it, debating, and of course an attractive location for congresses. So that idea led to the ICC might become in the future an MICC, MIC, Mobility Innovation Congress Center, for the world of the future of mobility. But that was only a starting point, and we as architects looked exactly at the plans, the dimensions of the buildings, also the structure, what it needs to bring life back into it, and also, for example, the building as a structure to house uses that kind of refinance the big financial investment that's needed here. So we also have tried to be very realistic and build a 3D model, studied the existing volumes of the building precisely, and split, also for you to understand, to make it maybe a little bit easier what the nature of the building is, the whole thing in several layers, basically in 3 layers. You see the yellow top layer, then the foyer, the lobbies that we are using in these days, this level and the upper level, the lower level, the entrance level, and then the basement that also Christoph Rauhut pointed out and showed some images. So let's look at it like a 3-layered logic. Separately, look at these 3 layers. The top layer is the layer for the convention center of about like 26,000 square meter in just one hall. You see a little icon of a section there where it's located. This is above us. I think people allow us also to go in there. Whoever, if you have not done it, you can walk into the main hall and take a look how it looks up there. So we have studied what the problem and what maybe the challenge is here. You might have heard that before it was closed down, the main problem was that the conference center was only used and rented 2 times a year for the ECHO award ceremony, as far as I know, and then for Daimler Chrysler at that time to house all their stock owners and have a final meeting every year. So it was only used twice. Why was it only used twice? Because it has a terraced auditorium, and the seats are fixed, so you cannot use it for dinners or for dancing, parties, events. You cannot use it as a fair hall, for example. But if you work on that, and we study precisely how that can be done, you can extend the flat surface of the other convention halls into the main space and create one flexible hall of 11,000 square meters. That's exactly what you need for an internationally top-notch convention center. It's a slight change, but if you do that, you can really re-inhabit the space, as shown here as a flexibly used convention center. So that's top level. Let's go to the middle levels, the 2 lobby areas that you have been coming through, and we're sitting in at the end of this drawing, the top left end, in that top layer. If you split them in half, the dark blue ones are the halls that we have seen in the morning. Room 6 is one of the 3 conference halls. Here, this we see as a very flexible, open, publicly accessible mobile reality for uses all around the topic of mobility, from Formula One to Formula E, to experience the future of mobility, for startups to have co-working here, but also presentation areas, debates, and so on. So new work environments, places for flexible use of anybody who would come and be part of that digital revolution all around mobility, but also other sectors, of course, sustainability and all the challenges that we are facing, but also pop-up gastronomy, so a real public space of flexible use. So yeah, when you imagine that to inhabit the lobbies, that is maybe something that is an example of how it could look like on the upper terraces, co-working. These are also the only areas that get light from outside. So that's where you maybe would want to sit and work. But everything's flexible, and also with the thought behind that 2 or 3 times a year, this all moves away and is open to make space for a great lobby when you have the real big conferences in the upper conference areas only a few times in the year. But in order to avoid that the space is completely empty during the other phases, you have to we have to come up with a strategy to move every equipment inside this space away to allow for these big events to happen. So coming down to the last layer, maybe the most interesting, also that Christoph Rauhut pointed out, the basement. We have taken a closer look at these large spaces of great height. And if you look at this section closely, you see that the basement is actually even wider than the ICC. It has large areas. It's about half of the gross floor area of the whole ICC, and nobody has really thought about these areas. So we looked at the logic, also the longitudinal section here. You can drive through the whole thing. It's very interesting. Some of you might have experienced that. You can drive through. You have these pickup scenarios like in the front. It's big enough for, I heard 700 cabs to wait and to bring people to the events, and also have people get to the cabs, the taxis, there after an event to have very, very quick access into and out of the house. And if you look at these areas and calculate how much space it is, it's actually interesting to understand why they are there. Nobody's smoking here at the moment, right? I hope. But in the other areas, in all the conference halls, when the ICC was opened, everybody was allowed to smoke. And that, of course, that's the reason why we have these huge ventilation shafts, the huge spaces in the ground, the channels, all these tubes that you see from outside, and they are absolutely unnecessary in the future. So when you reduce the space for the technical equipment in the house, you gain a lot of space. So our question was, how can we use that space? What can happen there? Could we open it to the public? Could we have it as the largest e-charging facility in Berlin for everybody to drive through who has an e-car? Could we use that infrastructure also to charge buses, the BVG buses, or also other vehicles? Could we use it for logistics? Could we use the large spaces as a storage space and then have trucks come through the AVOS, deliver goods in here, store goods, and then from here do the last mile in an electric way with the actual little vehicles that we see on the streets here, or with future new vehicles. So this is basically what we really believed in, that at the end of the day, we need to come up with very realistic scenarios for all these different layers, especially a very clear scenario for the conference center on top, a very clear scenario for the basement, to then allow these lobby areas to breathe in and breathe out what we might come up with today and in the future as a public space that we all would like to see. And then hopefully we can all work together with a large group of people. As said, I heard that ideas should come out of the society. at this call of ideas, we had a lot of investors applying and handing in proposals, mostly people who proposed to demolish part of the building. I think that was the only group that was coming out of the society, architects, consultants from Berlin that worked together to really deliver a study to be discussed here. And if we all move, maybe you show the last image. If you all work together, maybe that is how the ICC will look like in the future. You might be laughing, but these guys, these drones, are made by Volocopter, one of the most promising startup for taxi drones in Europe. And they have sent me a letter of intent. So if we move forward, they would immediately go and open one of their vertical takeoff and landing platforms on the roof here. So it's written, so yeah, let's work on this and make this house maybe a place where we talk about technology and the future. Thank you.
Silke, please.
Just jump in, no?
Yes, go
Okay,
ahead. Your
super.
ideas next.
First, I also have to think, I think it's amazing that we have the opportunity to talk about the ICC and our thoughts here, and so thanks to the organizers that we are also together on this stage. So we are in a constant exchange also to talk about things, so we know from each other. I think what's nice, because I think it also shows that the Berlin scene is very much into it, and we really would love to make a change, also working together on this, and I think that's first of all something that's interesting. When we are starting, I think our concept, as you see, is the ICCC, the International Center for Contemporary Culture. But I first would love to bring you, jumping a little bit back into other times, I think also maybe to understand a little bit more about this building. So what you see there, and so imagine, so it was 1975 when the building, when they started really to construct it and to do the architecture. And this was a time when there was a Cold War. And so we had the Palace of the Republic in the East Berlin, and we are now in West Berlin. We are on this kind of island. And at this time, of course, it was about, okay, who can do it bigger? What are West Berlin especially going to be? So they had to look. They were really spying what happened in the East, and we can do it bigger. And it was not really about having a lack of money. So as Mr. Schwarz said, I think when this was built, it was never built as a cash machine, as a cash cow. So it was just from the beginning clear that we will never make any profit out of it. And what's very interesting, what the architect did, is like this Gesamtkunstwerk. So they really has the possibility to get everything from scratch. And I'm very happy to see also the Frank Oehring there, who did the amazing light system that you see here. So just from the beginning, everybody was working together also in an artistic way and in a way of we want to do something. This is outstanding. This was really outstanding also for Europe. And so first you see the Congress, so it was bringing so many people together. But this, just from the beginning, was not just thought as being a Congress center. So when they started here, it was a big classical concert where you see that two big halls where like 5,000 people, 2,500 people came together from two sides watching this. It was about doing dancing performances, doing theater, so bringing all of these people together, so just from the beginning. And that's why I also wanted to bring you one photo or one sketch from Cedric Price with Mr. Littlewood. So in '61, they already had this idea of doing the Fun Palace, and that's when you're reading now, there's a lot of references, as I was preparing to Paris, to the Centre Pompidou, but I think so in the end, this is like the mother, father, where these ideas comes from, and I'm sure that Lina Schüler-Witte really had this idea of bringing together like what they had as an idea, like culture, science, universities, and everything. This is kind of playful bringing together of different ideas. And it was also funny to see, Thomas, as you see, there's already a helicopter on the top. Yes. So maybe this was a sign. So, So now we are jumping into 2014. This was the first open tender or the first open call for ideas. At this time, an investor called me and saying, you know, you're doing different cultural things in Berlin. Would you imagine doing a proposal for us? We need your help to bring together ideas for cultural use of a very big building. And I said, okay, what is it? Oh, it's the ICC. And I said, okay, that's very big. What can we do? And then we started setting up a process over 3-4 months. So we joined force with an architecture group, something fantastic, and saying, okay, how could we do this? So we set up workshops. We were sitting together with different experts. Even at this time, Carson, who's now in New York, joined us, and different other people. I'm over DC1 in this surrounding here. And so our idea was just from the beginning, we want to bring in culture, but when we're talking about culture, it can be different things of culture. So, because if you don't want to drop too many names, but if you're looking on it now, of course, it's always changing, but we know that the Berlinale is looking for space, or probably they found it. I know that the Berliner Philharmoniker will need very soon space. So there are different possibilities of usage, but Julian will come to this a little bit later again. But then nothing happened, so we didn't know, even our investor didn't know what happened, so nobody came back to them, and so with no idea. Then we heard about 2019 again, so we get in this concept, we set it up, get again. Nothing happened, and I was very glad, and I know Thomas Oberender is here as well today, who asked me if we can help him communicating his fantastic idea to bring the Berliner Festspiele with all of their, they have this power also to bring together music, theater, thinking things from a different way. So he set up here, the Sun Machine is coming down, a 10 days festival. And this was amazing because it brought back this building on the agenda of the people. So because when you see it from outside, I think it was 2 times in the Berliner Zeitung talking, oh, we have to break this building down because it looks so ugly from outside. Yeah, because nobody cleaned it from outside. But once you go in, you're really thinking, wow, we have to keep this. This is the most amazing thing that we can imagine here. And so this is another idea of the vitrine, and I think so how Thomas used it here, and I think this was a perfect imaginary example for how this building is usable. For example, where you're sitting here, there was a very big garden from an artistic approach from a performance artist, so it was really a good case to see how this could work.
Thank you. Thank you, Silke. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, just as Silke mentioned, I'm an architect, and we did together with Silke and her team, we did the architectural concept of how that could work, and the ICC really in a wider sense of culture, not culture as only focused on the arts, but culture in a sense of how do we actually come together, how do we deal with our data. And we've heard a lot over the past 2 days, all the topics, all the crises that kind of challenge our culture, that challenge how we come together and how we do all these things. I want to maybe one thing remind you of the time when this was built. There's a book, 1979, Zeitenwende, by an historian called Frank Bösch, and he describes, and the subtitle is The Beginning of Now. So in a way, he's arguing that 1979, everything that we're in now started, and he's referring to the revolution in Iran and to fundamental Islamism, and he's referring to neoliberalism and Margaret Thatcher and the foundation of the Green Party and so on. And yet, I think we're in a fundamentally different time, and this is just one graph. I could have picked any graph, but this is one that was trending yesterday in social media.
Can it go to the big screen?
And it's
Technique?
There.
Yeah.
it's showing how dry our soil in Berlin currently is, and we are at the far right edge now. And 1979, you see, it looks very different. So even though some things started back then, we are at a fundamentally different time. So our approach to the ICCC was that we think it could be really a kind of a icon, a landmark for a new approach to building, which is not building, which is actually thinking about how do we use better what is already there. And we've heard it from Carson and others. And so we think this approach of better use instead of always building is really what the ICCC could become an icon for. And just as a reference, only to bear in mind, so if we talk about CO2 emissions, there's a lot of discussions on flights, but if you compare it to the production of concrete, you realize actually we should really talk about building. I mean, which is not to say that we should not talk about flying. I mean, we should also talk about that. But our approach now, how to translate that into this building, where maybe I go one back. Where often in building we feel that we're facing wicked or even super wicked problems because our kind of social agenda, and Mayor Hidalgo mentioned it yesterday, we have a social agenda of we need more housing for people in cities. But then on the other side, we also know that every house produces or releases CO2 in the production and in the maintenance and so on. So we have conflicting agendas there. So one way of going about this would be to look at the consumption, or to really look at how could we use a house like this differently. What you see here is the average energy consumption of a household, I think in Denmark, in this case. But our approach to find a concept of how we could turn ICC into ICCC that is a really open and public building, that is accessible, that is not relying on accumulated capital, but that is kind of created out of the society and really is a place where we think about a new culture, is that we said we should rethink how we use it. And if you look at the two graphs, this is very, very basic. The upper one is showing the few events, the big conventions with up to 7,000 people, where you have this kind of peaks. But all the machinery in this building, and we've seen images of it, and I have, I have some here. There's a lot of machinery in this building. It's all equipped for these big conventions, but then they only happen a couple of times a year. So our approach would be to say we should use the building way better, but we should try to, it's called, in engineering, it's called peak shaving. We should try to cut off the peak, so we could actually deal with less input, less money, less resources, and we could, on the other hand, allow a much more diverse and resilient usage of the house. So what you see in the lower part would be the kind of the schematic of how we imagine the house to be used by different user groups, by some organized through institutions like, for example, Kulturräume, a newly founded institution in Berlin, or Berliner Festspiele or others, but it could also even be kind of end users. And of course, the big question is how do you organize that? And we also look closely at the building and what is there, what open rooms and which rooms are closed, what are the sizes of rooms, and how could they somehow, and how they could become part of a low-tech yet very smart building that is an open house where our culture is being discussed, debated, but also lived and kind of implemented in a way. And we also foresaw you have a hint here on, of course, the topic of how do we deal with our data is a really important one, where we see a synergy, a potential synergy. Carsten actually mentioned it in the heat and the warmth created by the data centers. Of course, there is a lot of security issues, and that would need to be solved. But this kind of this diverse and synergetic usage of different more and less commercial, more and less artistic is what we see as the kind of the idea for this building, and some glimpses on what could actually happen in those rooms. Whereas it would also be a lie to say we know exactly what will happen in those rooms. And I mean, it's written here, the new unknown. So of course we can. We're an initiative. We want this to happen, and we're talking to people. We're talking to the engineers who actually have maintained for the last decades this building. We have a meeting in October to see where's actually the potential to cut down costs, to then actually not cross-finance it and not too much rely on, again, some kind of big tech or big players, but to really make this an open place for society. And then I think I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Just have to ask, in that last image, was that water on the...
The last image was water, yeah.
Maybe we can pull that up. Sorry, I still see it, but I want to make sure everyone else can still see it as well, because that's an interesting...
So there's like the heat coming from the servers. We can already heat the pool on the top.
Okay, wow. Thank you all for your presentations. It's very interesting. And what I'd like to do now in around the 10 minutes or so that we have left is to hear from some of the speakers that we had on the stage earlier and also in the other room to get their takes on these two visions that we've just seen. So Carson and Christoph, Ross, Francesca, Stefan, if you are here and in the room, we have 5 microphones around that can be brought to you. I see Christoph there, so maybe you can be first to comment, and if other speakers would like to as well.
I hope the others are still here. So. It's very hard to comment for me because I don't want to give points to one or the other. But I think both are very good approaches, and they take, and that's what is very important for me, they take the building as a starting point. And it's a very easy summary for both presentations, and that's why both presentations and concepts can also be strong, because they accept the building and its architecture. And sometimes it could be hopefully as simple as that.
Are any of the other speakers who we had with us on stage here earlier?
I can see Carson there. He's like hiding.
Carson, I don't think we're going to allow you to hide. If we could give Carson a microphone if he feels... There we go.
Yeah, I don't... Hello?
Hello? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, no, I think I said what I wanted to say, but basically the idea is that the more open-ended the idea right now, to begin with, the more the project can evolve. I talked about thinking about the city through ecology rather than putting labels, deciding now. If we really understand the building as part of a larger human ecology, I think that's where to start. And I think both projects have aspects of that.
Thank you, Carson, for weighing in. Anyone else from our group of speakers still here? If not, I'd love to also hear from you, from members of the public, what you think about these presentations. You're here, you have been taking in this space in the program we've had here yesterday and today. And I'd be interested in hearing, as this is also going to be part of what the future of this building is, what you think of it. Anybody interested in sharing your thoughts? Don't be shy. Okay, we have a hand up there.
I was astonished when I asked somebody of the workers here, what about the heating? He said, oh, heating? There's no heating. We don't need it. The heating is the people, who are the visitors. So it's very interesting. We don't even need extra heating most of the time of the year. And also I was always wondering why they talk about the main costs of the to making the building more modern. We have to, the main costs are the, you know, I forgot the English name, the built-in structure, what has to be exchanged, but it doesn't need to be exchanged if we leave all like it is, and it's much cheaper. Asbestos, yeah, the asbestos. It's I don't know if that is a very important thing in case of the costs. The costs are not as much as many people think. Thank you.
Do any of you want to respond to that, of how that has been factored in?
Yeah, as I've said, there's great potential in renovating because you gain so much space in the ground floor if you rethink the whole technical equipment. And due to regulations and our standards today and the rules, we have to also, if we want to bring it back, we have to rethink the whole technological aspect behind, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And that's why I think there is these two options that we have, and maybe I think they can be easily combined. The one option is to allow us to inhabit it as it is in the next years, to start with that, to bring people back into the space, to get a feeling for the importance also of the building. But at the same time, we also have to make the big plan, and we have to talk with Mr. Senator, and he wants to know how to refinance that 1 billion that goes into the house as it was calculated by some consultants. And we need to have also a very clear idea how we deal with that and how do we create the real and the boring and the not fun business cases. And I very much believe that we need to have a strategy to rent the building out in these areas that are not so important to us, so the whole basement, and that we have the responsibility also to come up with the realistic and state-of-the-art scenario and strategy for the big conferences. Because don't forget, if the fair and an operator for conventions will also talk to the city saying, if I bring you 10,000 doctors on a conference here, everybody leaves 1,000 euros over these days in the city. So that's 10 million each time you have a conference here. It's a massive benefit for the city, and we need to also take that into consideration and allow the city and also the Senate to make these calculations. And therefore, I think it just needs a precise view on how do we do that.
That's how it was calculated over the years, no?
And if we do that, we can maybe win these open lobby areas as a playing field and the public space.
I think still in 2012, so this was the most successful year for the fair. So even just before they stopped, so it was like so it was kind of fully booked, and I think everybody enjoyed it to be here. So it was kind of a bit tricky situation.
Yeah.
But I maybe wanted to add to the asbestos, because this was also what I learned last year when I was working very intensively and talking to all of these different also engineers here. They're saying, I think it's a little bit like a myth, so because the asbestos is not the main problem here. It's just like it's on two very tiny places. So to get rid of this is not the problem. I think it's more like a technical question. And I think this is also what we wanted to show. There has to be very interesting and new solutions for thinking about the technique, and also what brings us to another, also Zeitenwende, in a way of thinking about it in a different way. And
maybe I would like to add to this question of a convention center, because I think, we should also Zeitenwende. We should bear in mind that this is also not used as a congress center anymore, and there's a cube built next door, because the conventions of running a convention center are that there's an empty hall, and the convention, or whoever is doing it, is just bringing in a lot of things, and they do the convention, and then they all leave again. But they also leave behind, in average, per every square meter of convention surface, almost 1 centimeter of trash, every convention. So this whole idea of how we do a convention, I think we should question that, and we should maybe rather invent something like saying, the ICC is as it is, you can do whatever you want, little provocation, but take your shoes off. It's just to say, you know, it's really about different ways of how we deal with our built environment. And so I think, yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, and I think that, so like I think technically wise also, if I would have a wish, I think I wish that we would have the papers that we can really calculate on something, because so far, okay, so we get some things in 2014, so not sure how old this is, but if we really want to calculate on things now, I think the Senate has to be prepared, and I think that's luckily what they're doing, what Mr. Schwarz also said, and I'm very thankful for, that we have the papers that we can really realistically think about how can we work on this in an architectural way, how can we bring in amazing ideas together, and then how to make it a place where people will really can come together, in which way ever.
That's certainly something to applaud. We have come to the end of this presentation and your visions for the ICC. Thank you so much, Silke, Julian, and Thomas, for sharing your visions with us. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks.